Form is the host, content is the virus.
Okay, hi, we're here with Leigh Stothard of the Forgetting Room to talk about the latest release on Shedload Records number 2, the amazing Ghost Codes album, and basically Leigh is here because he's the original drummer in the band to tell us a little bit more about the record. So Leigh, how did the Ghost Codes album come into being?
That is a deep and long question. Yes, really. Jonathan Taylor, who's no longer with us, sadly, died just when we finished it. It was a long friend of mine that I used to know as a boy growing up in Bingley, and we used to kind of get into all kinds of mischief and trouble, but we also started listening to music at that point, so we got into prog rock and we were listening to Yes and had some great times in a friend of ours' flat, just discovering music really. We were at that age where music suddenly became, oh, what's this, you know, and we both kind of developed the same loving for prog rock really. We were into Yes and Rush and Led Zeppelin and, you know, Spirit and all that kind of stuff. But John actually had some, I don't know if I should say this, but he had some psychological issues at that point and was getting a bit violent. I don't know if I should say this. Should I say all this?
I'll stay with it. Just
right.
Just go with it.
And it got to the point really where one day he said, I don't think you should come round anymore, because he had episodes where he didn't know what he was doing and would smash the place up. So we kind of stopped seeing him, and I didn't know where he was for, I would say, 15 years, something like that.
15 years?
It was 15 years.
And in that period, did you have any contact at all?
None. Didn't know where he was. I had no idea. Thought about him often, wondered how he was getting on, that kind of thing. Had nothing to do with him, and then by coincidence, I'd been drumming ever since, and I'm a bit of a drummer slag, so I would always say yes to any band that wanted me to do an album, wanted me to dep. So I kind of got around quite a bit. And as it happened, I was depping for a guy called Al Dickinson, who's an original artist from Leeds who does blues. He was wanting to do an album. Now, he was already working with Hugh Bradley, who's the bass player on Ghost Codes, who was also a musician slag, if you like, as in he'll play with anybody, but more on the kind of folk scene, but lovely, wonderful bass player. So Hugh got me in, did a few gigs with Al. Al wanted to do a record. He'd actually recorded all his parts in his shed at Al, and we were going to try and play along to them, but he hadn't done them to a click track, and it was just proving impossible. So we were really struggling with this. Coincidentally, Jonathan was working in a studio in Oakenshaw in a house where Al's son was living. So all of a sudden this kind of connection happened, and he'd heard about Al Dickinson wanting to do this album, and it turned out I was the drummer. So all of a sudden I met Jonathan again. It's like, hey, there you are.
and how was meeting him again afterwards?
Oh, it was fantastic. Yeah, I was a bit shocked actually when I first saw him, because he didn't look very well.
Right.
He looked really like he'd lost a lot of weight and stuff, but he was very productive, doing a lot of music.
Right.
And of course this place in Oakenshaw, the studio, Black Sail Studios it was called at the time, was where he was doing a lot of his work. So it ended up that we did the album there from scratch. We did it in one day, went in as a 3-piece. Johnny recorded it and produced it, and it went out. And from there, he just said, I've got other stuff do you want to work on, you know.
And was this the birth of the Forgetting Room?
This was then the birth of the Forgetting Room, because in that house was a guy called Kane Hellewell who plays guitar on the album. Right. So he'd sort of started working a bit with Kane and then come up with the Forgetting Room. So he was throwing ideas around and getting different musicians in.
Just for historical record more than anything, where did the name come from?
I have no idea. Jonathan came up with that.
Okay.
Jonathan came up with it, yeah. So, but I love the name.
It's fantastic.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it sort of was born out of long hours spent in a studio and kind of forgetting what you'd done, you know.
Right,
what have we done? I don't know, let's have a listen tomorrow.
Right.
I think that's where it came from.
So tell us a little bit about Jeff Noon, because I'll be honest, I don't really know a huge amount about Jeff Noon.
Well, I don't know a huge amount, but Jeff Noon is apparently the modern day Lewis Carroll. He's been sort of described as. He's from Manchester, and he's what would you call it? A cult writer, really.
Yeah.
Sort of sci-fi. I think he's got a bit of a following. I don't know much about him. Again, Jonathan sort of made that contact, and I think it was to do with putting music to some microspores or something that he'd put out. Yeah. So it came from there, and then it developed into this, oh, well, they've got these ghost codes, which is a lot bigger piece of work. I'd like to do more than a 20-second piece of music for these little snippets. I'd like to put an album together.
So the original was just basically small chunks of music aligned with these kind of text microspore items that were put out by Jeff Noon, yeah?
Which were very short.
Very short.
I think they were 30 seconds, maybe even less than that. Little snippets. And then somehow, I mean, straight away I was interested, absolutely. It was because it's quite an original idea, it's spoken word, really, but the musical influence. I mean, working with Jonathan was the first time really, because I've done a lot of work personally, depping and a lot of albums, and it's all very structured. It's right, can you play that? Can you do this? This goes like this. With Jonathan, it was like, I've done this music, do you want to put some drums to it?
Right.
And I go, what do you want? He go.
So Jonathan was very easy to work with in terms of from a musical point of view. He just let you
personally,
do your thing.
He was my musical soulmate, really. Right. In a lot of ways. So a lot of the music he wrote, I know what to play to that. I know what to play to that. I know what I want to play to that. And he'd go, yeah, that's great. That's what I wanted to. Right. But he'd never say, I want you to do this, ever. So I love that freedom.
So that was how the idea coalesced, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
So how did it expand into the amazing piece of work we now have?
Well, again, it was Jonathan really sort of pulled these people together. So somehow he got hold of Mandy Gibson, who was a long-term Jeff Noon fan. I have no idea how he made contact with her. And she's Australian, and she was from Australia. And
was she currently living? Was she at that time living in Australia?
She still does. So she did all her parts in Australia.
Oh, I wasn't even aware of that myself. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So that was quite a lot of toing and froing technically.
Yeah.
Jonathan sorted all that out.
Right.
But how he made contact with her, I have no idea. I really, really don't know. And again, with Tom Third, the music composer who's put quite a lot of soundscape on this album, is Canadian. Right. How on earth he made contact with him, I have no idea.
Right.
I really.
It's an album that has, from someone who's only really in the short term known it for about 2 or 3 months now, it's the amazing breadth and depth of the album is what struck me. Is the fact it's not just a piece of work that you go, okay, has fine tunes and melodies or whatever, but it has, every time I actually listen to it, there's another element that appears.
Yeah.
There's the looking deeper into the actual ghost toad, microspore elements, reading that, going, oh, I didn't realise he meant that, and then looking at how the music interacts with that.
Yes.
It's a very deep piece of work. Was you aware how complex the work was when you were working?
I really wasn't. I mean, some of the music was done before any of the narration was put on.
Yeah.
So at some points, when I was playing my part, I didn't know what was going to be put on it afterwards. So actually, it was a bit of a revelation to then suddenly hear, this makes sense now. There's some narration on it. There's some of Tom Third's, soundscapes being put on there. But yeah, I mean, I didn't know until I heard the whole thing, and I suddenly went, right. Yeah. That's it. I get it.
It coalesced into, because it has a very strong narrative.
Yes.
So when you actually listen to it and you're aware of what the narrative is, it's very clear. And obviously what struck me is partly why, there's many reasons why I'm so keen to put this amazing piece of music out, is the fact that it kind of sits with this strange, mad, zeitgeisty world we live in, where there's a virus and this, that and the other happening, and suddenly this record is an album that is talking about a virus, a end of an age, a new, way of thinking that's kind of being forced on people, and that's what really struck me. So now,
well, that's incredible.
How many years ago was it you were recording this album?
Well, it was probably 8 years ago actually. I think it was 7. Yeah. We kind of finished it 7 years ago.
So how do you feel now listening to this new, remastered, amazing version that you've obviously, I would assume you haven't really listened to it for a great deal?
No, for a long time. And then obviously when you got involved and said we're going to do this and we're going to re-release and we're going to put it on vinyl, I hadn't connected like you have done, the connection with now and the virus and how actually poignant it is for this point of time. It's like, wow, actually, yes, this should be out now. Yeah, right. I hadn't realised that. And also listening to it again, absolutely, it was a breath of fresh air because you do kind of, well, we'd all put it to one side, I think, when Jonathan died. It was very difficult to deal with.
So tell me about that time. So obviously it was a terrible time when Jonathan passed away. So you had this amazing piece of work that was virtually kind of, using that awful phrase that our glorious leader used, oven-ready piece of work that was ready to go. So what happened then? You had this amazing piece of work you produced and made, and it was ready to go, and then obviously Jonathan sadly passed away.
He did. So we had a bit of a release, but nobody was really, I think people were too close to it. It was too soon for anybody to kind of push it, and we kind of felt that we'd lost the person who was steering it in a lot of ways. So it was kind of not ignored, but just put to one side. I don't think people could really deal with it.
Right.
And I still struggle a bit now to deal with it because he was such a close friend, Jonathan.
So obviously the word ghosts in the title, but obviously it's more poignant now in a way.
Exactly, yeah, very.
So now we're up in what year are we in? 2021, who knows? Is it a Thursday, is it Sunday, who knows? So now, when you hear the album now, what are the emotions that go through your mind when you hear the album now?
I do get emotional, very emotional listening to it, but I think I've got a new appreciation for it now, with such a long gap in listening to it. Like you do when you forget an album that you haven't heard, and then you suddenly put it on and you go, oh God, I've missed this album. It's a really good piece of work, and I think the remastering, I can't actually wait to hear it on vinyl because I think it'll absolutely come alive. I think it was made for that. And I'm so excited to see it come to fruition and be in a gatefold sleeve, and you've done some great work, Mick, there.
Tell me a little bit about, I think it's Becky who did the pipes on it, because when I listened to it for the first time I was just shocked, amazed how the pipes just play such a huge part within the album, kind of like forcing the narrative along, bringing the themes up and down. So what could you tell us about?
Well, Becky is a talent. There's only a few people in the country that can play those things anyway, and she's probably the leading exponent of uilleann pipes, certainly. And the beauty of this album is you don't hear him in this context. You don't hear Irish pipe. Even if you talk to Becky about Northumbrian or Irish pipes, she'll say, I've worked with Becky before. She's played on some of my other albums and things like that. And whenever you talk to Becky, you say, Becky, do you fancy playing this album? She goes, yeah, but it's got to be in D, and it's got to be a bit diddly-die.
Yeah.
Whereas this album isn't. So it's really taken.
This couldn't be further removed from Irish Celtic folk music.
Exactly.
Ever. And yet, the pipes fit perfectly with there.
They are a driving force, like you say, but I think that is the beauty of it, to hear those things out of their normal context. They work so well. I was actually in a band with Becky before all this. We started a band and we were playing reggae with Irish pipes. Now, I still don't think anybody's done that yet, but unfortunately, we didn't quite get to the gigging stage. So having her on this album was just an absolute boon. Yeah.
And also, Amanda, have you spoken to Amanda since this project has been reignited?
Yes.
And what are her views as to what's happened?
Well, I've spoken to everybody. I've spoken to Mandy, I've spoken to Tom, obviously Kane, and I've spoken to Lindsay, who's Jonathan's wife, and everybody is thrilled, absolutely thrilled that it's going to see the light of day. I think there's enough time passed for everyone to get excited about it and go, yes, okay, yes. you know, it's that cliche, isn't it? Jonathan would have loved it. That's what he'd have wanted.
What has been lovely is the fact that the people who are watching this, you can go onto SoundCloud and actually listen to this album, and I'm genuinely, you'll be blown away by how amazing the music is. So I would strongly recommend anyone who's actually watching this, listen to it, and I'm sure you'll be amazed how amazed, I've used the word amazed far too many times here, but it is a truly clear, wonderful piece of work, and it will be coming out in Easter time, 2021.
I'd just like to thank you for picking up on it and be willing to release it. It's absolutely fabulous. You and John Sessions, of course, who's really been instrumental in all of this.
Yeah.
Without him, it wouldn't have happened. You know, he's the executive producer on it all. And really, I think spurred Jonathan on quite a bit to get it done. Because a musician working on their own.
People who do buy this record are in for a treat.
Absolutely.
In this mad age that we're actually living in, this is a piece of music that fits almost perfectly in the world we're living in. So if anyone's out there is thinking about buying an amazing piece of music, I strongly recommend this album. Even if you don't buy it, just listen to it, because it is amazing. Well, Leigh, it's been a pleasure to meet you, because this is the first time we've met.
It is the first time we've met, yeah.
So cheers. Can I just
Thanks
say,
for having
it's
me.
been a pleasure to meet you. And check the album out.
Check it out. Check it out.